Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's program. I am recording this program, so if you know someone who desperately wanted to be here and couldn't, or if you want to go back to this conversation, you can watch the recording. It is on our YouTube channel, the Kellogg Hubbard Library's YouTube channel. We keep links to that on our adult programs page on our website, and I will put that in the chat so that you can see that. It's the perfect place to go if you want to see this program, if you want to see other programs that have been in the climate change speaker series. The links to those videos are there as well. And if you want to sign up for the next couple talks in this series, current legislative initiatives update will be on February 8th, and what can we do will be on March 8th. And you can sign up for those Zooms on that page as well. And again, I'll put that in the chat. It's the Kellogg Hubbard Library's website, and it's the adult programs page. I am Michelle Singer. I am the adult programs coordinator for the library. It is my pleasure to work with the League of Women Voters every year on their speaker series. This is our 7th year working together. It's a fantastic partnership, and they always have a really great lineup of panels. A couple of housekeeping things. Please stay on mute. We are expecting a big group tonight. It's wonderful to see so many people here. It's wonderful that we have so much community involvement. Thank you for being here. We do need everybody. That means to stay on mute so that we can hear our speakers really clearly. If you have a question, we very much want you to ask it. We would like you to put it in the chat. If you're not familiar with chat, if you hover on the bottom of your screen, there's a bunch of little icons that pop up, and there's a little word bubble, and it's chat, and you push on that and it brings up a dialog box, and you can type a question in chat. So feel free to do that at any time during this panel discussion, and we will take questions. Without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Kate Rader of the League of Women Voters to give the introduction of the panel tonight. Thank you again for being here.
Good evening. It's so exciting to see how many people on this list of participants. So I'm Kate Rader, as Michelle said. This is the 7th series presented in partnership with the Kellogg Hubbard Library, addressing issues of public interest on topics ranging from the First Amendment to criminal justice. This year, we are looking at the impact of climate change on Vermont. The mission of the League is empowering voters and defending democracy. We acknowledge past injustices in the form of land confiscation, slavery and lack of economic opportunity, and denial of civil rights, including in the movement for women's suffrage. Our mission includes commitment to social justice and inclusive policies to address generational dispossession of and discrimination against women, Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color, all of which still persist. To that end, tonight we specifically discuss climate change and social justice. Tonight's discussion will be moderated by Senator Kesha Ram Hinsdale, the first woman of color to serve in the Vermont Senate. She has championed the environment in the legislature for over a decade and built a coalition to pass Vermont's first environmental justice policy in 2022. In the state Senate, she is chair of the Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs Committee and serves on the Finance Committee. Kesha received a 2022 Environmental Merit Award from the Environmental Protection Agency for her environmental justice work. I will now turn the program over to Kesha, who will introduce our panel.
Thanks so much, Kate, and League of Women Voters, as well as Kellogg Hubbard Library. I wish we could all be together, but illness seems to be back on the rise. So this seems like the safest option with a crowd of nearing 70 people. I see also a lot of familiar faces and people who have a lifetime of experience advocating for the underserved and unheard, the voiceless, and the environment. And you know, if you're anything like Judy Dow, you carry with you 16 or more generations of lifetimes advocating for this work. So it's a real privilege to join Judy and Kashka and facilitate this conversation. I thought before I open it up to them to talk about their work and their passions and how they arrived at this work, I thought it would be helpful to get on the same page in terms of some definitions in speaking about climate justice specifically. And I always count on someone like Judy to add to the definition and even subtract when necessary. These can be, written in a very specific frame, and especially when we're in our legislative work, it's not a frame that was constructed by a diversity of people. But I have found the National Council of Environmental Legislators to have just a pretty simple and straightforward set of definitions that are helpful. So forgive me for not saying specifically. I was about to start sharing my screen, but hopefully this is pretty large and visible to folks. First, so what this is the National Council of Environmental Legislatures one pager. That's what we use a lot in the legislature on climate justice. And in their overview, they're essentially just saying that the individuals and communities that contribute least to the climate crisis are already facing and will continue to face the greatest impact. And that already amplifies existing injustices in terms of who's been facing the largest environmental and climate justice impacts. I often say that some of our greatest environmentalists in US history are Harriet Tubman and Sacagawea, and John Muir and Theodore Roosevelt really can't hold a candle to them. They knew this land better than almost anyone. So, I come from this frame that often they have had environmental solutions that have been ignored as well. Climate justice is defined here as, and it, acknowledging that it has a diversity of definitions, and that's okay. There's no one definition. There are 3 principles, and I teach these in my environmental justice class at Vermont Law School. Distributive justice, referring to the allocation of burdens and benefits. So who receives environmental costs, who receives environmental benefits, and how do those become more equalized in a sense. Procedural justice, who's involved in decision-making, something I think about a lot. I think a lot of us do. And recognition, the basic respect and robust engagement with and fair consideration of diverse cultures and perspectives. So really acknowledging that there are many ways to approach this work, and we've often ignored original instruction and very valuable knowledge from other cultures and communities. Climate injustice is sort of helping to define the converse of climate justice, that these impacts of climate change are going to be felt differently by different groups, and the vulnerability is not simply because they are impacted in a greater way, but because their ability to be resilient and recover is also hampered by stolen wealth, a combination of socioeconomic and past circumstances as well, and institutional classism and racism and other elements of how our society functions. Just transition is a concept that's used a lot in this work to talk about how our current very extractive gray and brown economy needs to turn into a restorative green economy, and work for more people and center those who've been most marginalized. And I did not know this when I started to look at these definitions and think they were valuable, but the first bill that they identify as a helpful guide to advancing environmental and climate justice is S-148, the bill that we passed this year that certainly Judy and other particularly BIPOC leaders in Vermont helped me craft. And writing an environmental justice bill is not just about getting the words right, but getting the people who are most impacted, centered, and involved. And I was really grateful that we were able to do that. So I thought that was a helpful way to just start getting on the same page about what we're talking about. And I wanted then to stop doing a majority of the talking and turn it over first to Judy, if possible, to introduce herself, and to certainly both of you can add or subtract from the definitions I shared. So sharing what climate justice means to you and how you arrive at the work that you do. Judy, you're muted.
That's because you told me, somebody told me to. Yeah, so my name is Judy Dow. I've lived in Chittenden County my entire life. I now live in Essex. I have been an educator for 38 years. I am currently the executive director of Gedakina. It's a Native organization to help women and their families throughout New England that are Indigenous, to help them to self-determine a good path in life. And what else? I guess that's enough. I'm a grandmother, a mother, and a wife. I do have something to say about the definitions. You were right. But Kasha, introduce herself first.
That's
Oh,
entirely
no.
fair. Kashka, go ahead.
Thanks, Judy, and thank you, Kesha. So my name is Kashka Orlow. I'm an immigrant. I'm a sole parent. I'm a frontline community member. I was asked to consider participating in the Just Transition Subcommittee over 2 years ago. And I hadn't really done any climate justice, equity work before that, but I certainly have lived experience. I went to school in New Orleans, Louisiana, where I saw firsthand how different kinds of policies and how frontline community members and BIPOC communities are forgotten in conversations when it comes to any kind of policy making, just because they're just not at the table. It just doesn't matter. And so when I was asked to join Just Transitions, I thought, okay, so this is an opportunity to let the legislators and know about how people in frontline communities actually feel, how these programs and policies affect them and their everyday life, and how it makes it better or worse, even with unintended intentions. The intentions might be great, but the consequences might be quite different from that. So that's how I got to be involved with Just Transition Subcommittee. And ultimately afterwards, I have now joined other subcommittees and task groups, and have tried to be more engaged and involved in this topic. I have 2 children, and I think that this isn't about save the earth. I think it's about save the humans, because I think the earth, once we're gone, it will be okay. But right now we are killing our mother. So I think that we need to do something different, and we need to do it together. And that's why I'm here. And I'm hopeful that we can do it together.
Thanks so much, Kashka. That hopefulness is important. So I just want to know, I am tracking questions in the chat. I think we'll stay, broad and high level, and let our 2 panelists talk about the broader topic, and then we'll dive deep into questions after about 30 to 45 minutes. Judy, you've also, I think, were talked into by me joining the Just Transitions Subcommittee of the Climate Council. I appreciate you for doing that. And you really highlighted the rigor and the science behind Indigenous knowledge in the group, and you've been really fighting for that perspective. Can you talk more about, how you've done that over time and also brought that to the Climate Council?
Yeah, I've served for over 2 years now on the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee, the Biomass Task Force, and the Life Cycle Analysis Committee. In all of those, the one thing I've been fighting for day one is equity for the land. And that's why your definition that you shared is I could see that as confrontational, because if we do not have a healthy land, we can never have a healthy economy. So the healthy land always has to be first, always. If it's not, the economy will never be healthy. And that's what I would change on that definition for the most part. And that's been my battle throughout this whole thing. Before we came online, Kashka and I were talking about the differences between Just Transition and the meetings that we recently had in which equity has been the issue since day one. There's so many people in positions of leadership that have no idea what equity even means. And so we've had that discussion frequently with Just Transition and the Climate Council. The one thing that I was successful in getting added was a fairness to all living and non-living things, because I wanted people to give life and value to water and to the land. If we don't see water as an equal, we're going to have some serious trouble.
Mm.
If we don't see our land and our water as kin, we're going to have troubles.
Yeah, I mean, really, thanks for adding to the definition, and it in a way speaks to that idea of recognition. If you're not even recognizing who should have a seat at the table, what should have a seat at the table, it's challenging then to move forward and talk about what distributive and procedural justice look like. Kashka, what voices have you felt like have been missing from the policy tables and spaces that you've been sitting at?
Well, I feel I would like to address something that you're discussing right now, and I before I answer that, it's not just about the missing voices. I think that identifying the fact that the voices are missing, we have to look at the why, and even in the company of others who have been trying really hard to have those voices at the table, like the Just Transition Subcommittee. I think that the issue becomes, and it has been since I've joined, and this is something that Judy and I were talking prior to starting the meeting. The issue has been from the very beginning. You are asking to have equity within these meetings. You are asking for members of the BIPOC communities and as well as frontline community members at the table, having these conversations and having their voices heard, just like Judy being heard and being added to Just Transitions, because otherwise we wouldn't have that verbiage in there if it hadn't been for Judy. So if that voice hadn't been heard, that would have never been placed in. However, why are they not there? It's not for lack of trying. And for me, being at these meetings, I'm now seeing the why. You're asking community members to have such a small bandwidth, who have so many other things going on. They are not public employees. They are not associated with an organization. They are members of the public that are not being compensated for the time that they're putting into this. So that is where the issue lies. It is one thing to be asking somebody to come and join a meeting once or twice a year, but it's quite another to be really engaged and active in meetings for years and helping this move forward, especially when you're talking about community members that are struggling, not just from paycheck to paycheck, but with several different jobs, raising their children, trying to figure out how they're going to heat their homes, how they're going to pay for gas, how they're going to deal with this disaster and that disaster. There's just so many other issues on their plate rather than being a voice on these committees without compensation. So I think compensation is the reason why there's just not more voices at these, more voices that we really need. We really do. Otherwise it's not equitable. You're right. It's just not.
I can hear the passion, and I really appreciate that. And when I look around, I think we have a lot of people on who are also trying to find ways to extend toward communities and voices that are unheard, people who are working multiple jobs and exhausted and, care about the environment and are unable to act on that. And I sometimes say, there's 3 C's if you want to reach people: compensation, curiosity, and connection. And usually what I mean by that is, compensation hopefully means actual money. Sometimes it means making sure someone has their basic needs met to attend a meeting. So offering, if you can't pay people cash, offering childcare, food, transportation, even just, compensating people with gratitude and making sure they don't feel like when they do speak up, they're ostracized for their perspective. Curiosity, that kind of goes hand in hand with the last thing I said. Often when people say, I feel like Vermont is not a welcoming place, I feel like I'm experiencing racism or classism, people will say, really? I mean, is that true? because I don't see that happening. And, you really, when people trust you enough to tell you that they're not feeling safe or comfortable or welcome, the best thing you can do is be curious and sort of lean into that. And then connection, so often I'll try to remind people that there is a critical mass out there of, people of color who care about the environment, and often they don't get to meet at these events. They're the only person there who looks like them, and it can just be really lonely. And just to think about, if you're putting people on a board or you have a neighborhood group, how to try and make sure that someone doesn't end up being the representative for every, trying to speak for every person of color, every low-income person. How can you make sure that they can connect with other people that make them feel engaged? What do you two all have advice for, how to help build authentic relationship and connection that gets, in addition to compensation, gets people feeling like they could join their local town energy committee or be part of these forums and these solutions?
So if I may, I would definitely invite people to go onto climatechange.vermont.gov to kind of read through the climate action plan and see different ways of getting involved. I would certainly invite people to, even after this meeting, put down their information or have it sent if you would like to be involved a little bit in greater detail with any of the upcoming and future events that we are planning, to make sure that everybody is basically spreading the word about any new policies that are coming through and has a voice in them. It's not easy to meet people where they're at, but that is our goal eventually, to meet people where they're at. And the advocacy work and the reaching out means perhaps not just in this kind of environment where it's a Zoom meeting, but perhaps a cookout or a concert. And we're literally just to me, that's where community comes together. I love Vermont. I've raised my kids here, but I've lived all over the States. And what I do miss is, for example, the sense of community that I found in a place like New Orleans, where we would have a crawfish boil and everybody would come together and you would talk about all kinds of different topics. And it was very freeing to be able to have these conversations, and not so much about, for example, how do you feel about climate change or how does that affect you? Because what we have found in our, I guess what I have found in my advocacy work or in doing community outreach is it's not really about climate change when you're talking to communities that have so many other really important issues that they're dealing with right now. But when you're listening to what is going on in their lives, they are directly related to climate change and what's happening. However, those people haven't made that connection yet. And it's for you, when you know a little bit more about, the policies or what's happening, to see the connection. Okay. So this is how this policy or this program may help you or may inadvertently hurt you and your community. So it's kind of our job to bring that to the forefront. But the way that you reach those communities is oftentimes one-on-one engagement in a place that's not just a meeting or a Zoom or something that's very structured. That's my take on it. I would like to see more fun community events. I think that would be fantastic.
I keep thinking of a couple of things. I grew up in a household where we were told what's said in this house stays in this house, because we were the largest family targeted by the eugenics survey in Vermont. There wasn't a full understanding of what that was when I was a child. But I also was told that every right you have comes with a responsibility. So if you have the right to vote, you have the responsibility to get your butt out of the chair and go vote. And so I have been an educator for 38 years, and I think it's critical for communities to have the opportunity to understand what the issues are, what the latest climate change buzzwords are, and how it's going to impact them. Because if you don't spend time educating the people that you love and you care for and you worry about, who is? It's your responsibility to help them. I often tell the story of the fact that we're living in a world of limited resources, and we're going to travel through the narrows into a new world. And in this new world, because of climate change, all systems will be broken. They will not be the same as today. And when you're in the narrows, there's things that change. The current changes flows, the winds change, and you have a very short time to make up your mind. Am I going to go through the narrows to the Broad Lake, or I'm going to stay in the calm bay area? And everybody's going to go through those narrows. Some people are fall down, they're never going to make it. Some people are going to pick up those that fall down. Some will be lost forever. But those with money will always be able to buy their way through the narrows. And so I think it's critical to help pull those people up and educate them within your community as to how they can make it through the narrows and why it's so important for them to make it through the narrows. And Shirley Chisholm always said, if they don't invite you to the table, bring your own chair. And I often bring my own chair because I'm not invited to the table. And those are all things that I think as a parent to parent, as a teacher to teacher, a student to student, a mother to mother, we have to educate our communities about.
Thanks, Judy. Thank you both. I think I didn't hear anything that was a sort of discord, but Kashka, you talked about how are we going to move on to caring about the planet if we can't come to caring about each other? Judy, you have a very seamless way of thinking of humanity as part of nature. I feel like I blinked and we went from 6 billion people on this planet to 8 billion people. And yet, climate justice is a conversation about how highly populated countries aren't necessarily the ones that have the greatest climate emissions. How do you square the increased need for space for humanity and where people will go in as the climate crisis grows? I already talked to people who come to Vermont because they're from the South or DC and it's gotten too hot. I came from Los Angeles 18 years ago because I had this sense that just wasn't going to be a great place to live as the world changed. Vermont, is considered a climate destination, and yet we're 40,000, housing units short of meeting the need and are going to see increased homelessness and struggle. At the same time, a quarter of our houses sit unoccupied for a majority of the year as second homes. So, just dealing with all the complications of wealth versus population versus, equity. How do you sort of square all of that?
Well, if I may, I think that it's important to actually ask people like Beverly Little Thunder and Judy and people who are indigenous to this land to ask their advice how to better live with the land when you're building, and not just have oppressive legislation or policy that doesn't allow for us to build, I guess, responsibly, but in a way that's welcoming and also caring about each other and about the earth and about the environment. To just give an example, and this is something that comes up for me all the time. I work with one of my many jobs. I work with the Howard Center. I do a lot of outreach work to people who are experiencing homelessness, including families and children who are living out of their cars. I myself was homeless with my children for a short period of time. I think that it's a terrible injustice when there are people with 2 or 3 dwellings that sit unoccupied, and I am giving jugs of water to a couple who is simply trying to survive in a tent by the water because they cannot find housing. And it's not for lack of trying. And I think we're going to have more and more of that unless we change our policies and our laws. But I think policymakers need to work with people like Judy to figure out ways how that can be worked out well with the land, because we don't want to desecrate the land and just keep building, and then there's nothing. We've now raped and pillaged the land like they have out in Las Vegas, for example. So I think again, it's about collaboration and listening to each other and listening to those who have the insight of how to do it better going forward.
Before I let Judy answer, I just want to say, Judy and I first met because I was working on my thesis on environmental justice at the University of Vermont, and the Intervale had this huge composting facility that was really toxic. And, she was this lone voice saying, yes, composting should be part of our waste solutions, but you shouldn't put it in a floodplain, in a riverbed, because it does become toxic waste as it decomposes. And it was many years of fighting, Judy, before people finally acknowledged that she was right. Yes,
7 years.
So I just want to, Judy won't always say this herself, but she really does bring a folding chair and just sits there until the rest of the state will listen to her.
Even when they call the police on me or send a bulldozer after me, I still sit there.
So that's what I mean. Why does it take 7 years for somebody to listen to Judy? Well, when she's saying something that makes sense and that's going to, that's what's extremely frustrating for me, and that's been extremely frustrating with government and policy. It's the slowness of movement, and I wish that we heard voices over corporations. I wish that we heard voices of experience and knowledge rather than money talking all the time, and economics, because it's just frustrating. It's frustrating.
So I have a lot of these things that people call gray hairs. I call them wisdom strands. They're kind of something you develop by just living. right? So I got a lot of those popping up here and there now. And I've seen that same interaction with the people of authority, the lawyers, the politicians, where they say something that meets the need today, but then down the road the need changes and they don't want to go against what they said. So we've lived in the same house for, oh gosh, 40 years. And when we moved here, we put a well in and they told us to expect sidewalks and town water in 10 years. So last year I went to the community meetings and I said, the town meetings, and I said, it's 40 years now, I'm still waiting for water because you're permitting more and more and more houses to be built. Our wells are being threatened every time a new house is built. And they're like, oh my God, you're on the scenic route. You're never going to have town water. And so they reevaluated and came to the conclusion we were never going to have town water. Now that's happened. I saw a comment in here on landfills and a comment on McNeil, and that same thing has happened. You have to look at 7 generations. Put yourself in that middle generation. Look forward and backwards. Backwards, 3 generations of your ancestors, and forward 3 generations for those yet unborn. They will see your actions and they will hear your voices. And everything you do, you have to remember, my mother and father is listening to me, or my grandmother or grandfather, or my great-grandchild. They're all listening to what I'm doing. You have to keep that in mind. You can't take a 50-year-old facility like McNeil, the largest polluter in our state, and allow them to apply for an Act 250 permit to expand. You can't do it. You have to look at the people within that community. In a 1-mile circle, the numbers of people with COPD has reduced. The number of people with asthma attacks that go to the hospital has reduced, but so has the age limit. So the average COPD person who has a COPD attack went from 35 to 20. The average age of a COPD attack in that neighborhood is 20 years old. Asthma, it went from 27 years old to 10. The average age of a child who goes to the hospital for an asthma attack from that 1-mile radius is 10 years old. The landfills aren't any better. Like Kesha said, it took 7 years for me to fight. And not only was I fighting to protect the water because they were directly dumping leachate full of toxins into the Winooski River that flowed into the lake where people got their drinking water, but they were placing this compost, rotating it daily on known burial sites. So this looking backwards and looking forwards on everything you do is critical. You have to do this. You can't expand McNeil up the road to provide heat for UVM and heat for the medical center without considering the long road that goes between McNeil and those 2 places. Without considering we're talking about a 50-year-old facility that may not work tomorrow. Without considering the fact that we're losing all our trees and they expect a 4% increase of emissions and the use of fuels if we continue to let them expand. Those trees are so critical to storing the carbon that they sequester. And that science is critical, but so are the people who live there. So is the community that lived there. And we have to consider all of it.
Thank you. So I am monitoring the chat, and one thing that feels imminent and urgent is to sort of check in about the closed captioning. I know Michelle from the library is working on figuring out how to do that. I don't want to impose my thoughts here, but we do use closed captioning often in the legislature, and sometimes it's an option right when you get in to say there's closed captioning available. Do you want to access it? Kind of yes or no. So I don't even know if the people who need it are hearing me, but Michelle, I just want to say if there's anything you want to say right now as you try to figure this out.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really important. I enabled it on the back end. There was one thing I needed to turn on the back end to that hopefully lets you use Zoom's automatic captioning. And I'm looking at the bottom of the screen, there's a CC button, and live transcription is turned on. And I'm still looking at kind of how that actually pops up on the screen.
Well, it pops up when you sign on, just like Kesha said. So maybe if the person signed off and signed back on again, the caption will pop on. The opportunity to hit the button and say yes.
Okay.
I'm sort of going back now through the questions that are in the chat. I think we've reached a good point to sort of transition.
Kesha,
yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. May I just address something that that Judy was pointing to?
Yeah, yeah.
With the McNeil plant, which is my neighborhood, and the Biotask group has done such incredible work in trying to bring light to that situation. But for somebody like me, who isn't an indigenous person, who hasn't lived here all her life, and who lives next to the McNeil plant and sees the smoke coming out and has gone on their website. I don't know if anyone has, but the first thing that they do is have an explanation for all this that Judy is bringing up. And for somebody who, again, may not know much about it, doesn't know the science behind it, and may not understand that this may in fact be greenwashing, is what they're doing on their website. I feel like that's where a lot of the conflict comes in. That's where a lot of the name calling and I don't want to say from the other side, but from people who are maybe have very conservative points of view. So how do we address this? How do we address fact from, because for example, on McNeil's site, it is said, these are the facts. These are the facts. So what are the facts? How do we find out how, what is factual? Where do we find a compromise? How do we do this? I think those are really important questions, because obviously, just as you said, the population of the world is growing. There's going to be more disparity. There's going to be more climate refugees coming to Vermont. So how do we make it better? How do we figure out a way to work together, not to pull each other apart? And how do we answer these questions of inequity, but also make sure that the information out there is factual?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Kashka, the Biomass Task Force had 12 scientists from the United States, Canada, and Germany come and speak to us. And they all at various levels and various ways said that burning wood for heat or for electricity is the worst thing that we can do for this world. They all told us that. So we went with recommendations. And our recommendations included closing down McNeil on a timeline and helping the loggers find new jobs, be re-educated if that's what it need be, helping them to make ends meet, make their end needs met if when they lose their job. And the Climate Council in their annual report to the legislation left our recommendations off. As you know, at the last meeting, we contested that, or I contested that. And I was very adamant about that. And that's what we have to keep doing. We have to keep pointing out there's another side of the story. There's your side, there's my side, and there's a balance in the middle. And until we see both sides, we cannot determine that balance in the middle. We can't do it.
Yeah, I think what you just said.
We have to allow every perspective that wants to be heard to be heard. And it could be the voices of marginalized people. It could be the voices of BIPOC. It could be the voice of a grocery store owner on the corner of the road. They all have to be heard.
And acknowledged. I agree.
And I think there's just too many opportunities for them not to be heard right now. And the Social Equity Caucus has come up with, what are they calling them, Kesha? Tools. It's a
the probing questions or the
probing questions. And those probing questions are going to be presented to every chair of the committees. And they're going to be asking them to learn how to use those questions. And they're simple questions like this bill you're working on, have you considered the impacts on BIPOC? This bill you're working on, have you considered, is it equitable? There's simple questions like that, but it comes down it comes down to education. If people don't have the time to be educated or want to be educated, we're never going to get to that balance in the middle.
Yeah, I think that will be, I mean, these are questions that should be asked anyway, but now we do have, a tool to say these questions need to be asked before a bill can advance. Otherwise, you're going to end up on the floor sort of trying to answer these questions. And I know Maine, however imperfect it is, all their advocacy groups will only support a bill moving forward if it has equity at the center of it. So their Planned Parenthood, their environmental groups, their groups, try to they have a pact that if a bill, hasn't considered those most vulnerable, they also aren't advocating for that bill. So there are ways that various legislative groups try to tackle that. So thank you.
And there's this little story I want to tell you. For 3 years, I worked with the students at Champlain Elementary School to learn about Engelby Brook that goes right on the side of their school. They understood how important the riparian zone is. They started a nursery to grow new trees and new plants to put into the riparian zone. And they had little field cameras set up. And this is the only above ground brook in Burlington that the headwaters and the mouth are fully in Burlington. They go from the country club down to the lake. And these kids would travel it at least weekly and document what they see, record what they saw. They had field cameras. They documented bear and deer and fox and raccoons, all kinds of things. And then they found out about the Southern Connector being built. And they were all upset and they were like, what can we do? And I'm like, well, It's going to the US federal court. I don't know what to do. Let's talk to a lawyer. So we did. And the lawyer asked the kids to file a restraining order. So we did. And we got a restraining order. The first time ever in this state, a restraining order was issued against an environmental case. And we went to court. So I show up in court with all these fifth graders and all these suits. And the kids were nervous, but I'm like, it's okay. I'll take you out to eat after. No problem. Don't worry. And we'll make it. So they go and we lost. But a month later, I got a call from the judge and he said, can you bring those students in? I want to give them a tour of the court and I want to tell them about the impacts they had. So we brought the kids in, the kids got a tour and he told them that the lawyers said from this point on, they will never file an environmental complaint on anything without hearing the voices of the children. And so we actually won. I mean, they cut down 12.5 acres of trees in the riparian zone and the kids were devastated, but they actually won because now the voices of the children are going to be heard. And so it's those kinds of things you have to do. You have to get out, whether they're old or young, get out there and educate people so they can speak for themselves.
That's empowering. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm seeing a lot of conversation in the chat about our energy sources and, you know, what's on the docket and upcoming legislation. I actually just wanted to take a moment to say I had a really life-changing experience visiting the part of India that became Pakistan. That's where my family's actually originally from. And Lahore is now 10 miles from the new border, that not new, but it was drawn in 1947. And my family left and never returned. And I just had the opportunity to return after 75 years. And it was even more special because my great-great-grandfather was the chief engineer and architect of Lahore, a city now of 15 million people. And he believed very deeply in a sense of modernity that would create possibility for people. I hope many of us can appreciate that energy does make a lot possible. It makes it possible for us to talk to each other right now, you know, in warm, well-lit homes. It is now also the system that is going to make all things impossible on the planet if we continue to use energy in the way we are and produce energy in the way we are. My great-great-grandfather built actually the first hydropower plant in all of Asia that we visited. He built it 100 years ago and it's still operating and it still powers 27 villages that otherwise didn't have light and food and energy. And I found it particularly beautiful. He used a 10-foot drop in the water, did not impede the flow of the water, did not flood any land, and created a power station that is still operating with just a handful of workers, one of whom his father worked in the plant and he was working with his grandson. So he probably was responsible for keeping that plant operating well past its life. But, it was a really great opportunity for me to see that there are small energy systems that work, and that don't often harm the environment or harm villages, harm people, displace people. We have to be able to say yes to some form of energy production as well. Do you all have examples of things in our energy systems that you think are working, so that we can continue to have the possibility that comes with energy production?
I don't know what to say about that. I believe technology is not the answer to our problem. What's happening now is we're living in a world where we have a demand. They create technology to meet that demand. And then the demand grows, they just create more technology to meet the new demand. The problem with that is the technology has its own problems that it comes with. I believe in good old reducing. We talked about that since my children were little. Reduce, reuse, and recycle, right? And we have to reduce. We have to buy more sweaters and turn the thermostat down. We have to reduce on our travel. We have to reduce everything. I don't have problems with any one thing other than biomass and biofuels, but they each have their problems. So for instance, the solar panels, now towns are starting to pass laws where houses have to be constructed with a certain kind of roof so that it can support the weight of the solar panel. And also they're passing bills to say that individual what do you call them, charging stations for electric cars have to be in all new houses. Where's the equity in that? How can everybody afford that? They can't. We all had one gas pump to go to. Why do we have to have individual charging stations with a 400 amp breaker? Because it increases the cost of the house. So again, it comes down to balance. We're using solar panels where the lithium is harvested from reservations or by children in China. And we can't continue to do that. It's not sustainable. It's not renewable. And people are misusing words like renewable and sustainable and fracking and what have you. And again, I can't say it enough. Everybody has to educate themselves. They have to learn how this greenwashing is happening simply because they don't know what those words truly mean. So for me, it comes down to balance. I wouldn't say any one thing is right or any one thing is wrong. I would put the emphasis on reducing. I have seen so many things coming out of the climate councils, never once uses that word. And it just seems, yeah, it just seems so easy.
I think that I think back to, I guess, a simpler time. Again, I was born in Eastern Europe, and using and reusing things, and no throwaway, being mindful of the items that you have, bartering, sharing, exchanging, rather than continuing to consume. And I feel like when I came to the United States, I was just in awe. I mean, everything was just so big and colorful, and so much food, and oh my gosh, I just couldn't believe it. It was just incredible. But I think about it, and this is kind of how I raised my daughters. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to know that while, you know, I'm doing the best I can to compost, and when I compost, oh my gosh, if something has gone to waste, I'm really almost really upset because it's gone to waste. So hopefully it's just a very, very small amount. And then driving up to a corporation like a Dunkin' Donuts and seeing them just throwing away all this food into a trash bag, which they apparently do several times a day. Going to a supermarket where apparently you look at this entire huge heap of beautiful apples, and the reason they all look so beautiful is because on a daily basis, the ones that don't look as perfect are thrown away, not composted, not given away, because there's laws and regulations against it and policies against it, but they are thrown away. They can't be given away. They can't be donated. They can't be given to people who are hungry, but they're just thrown away. So it's just, I feel like we've become this monster that's just this insatiable feeling of constant greed. And I kind of wish that we would take a step back and say, enough, just enough. Enough is enough. We don't need a television in every room. You don't need that. And if you have a second home, that should be a luxury that I don't know. I haven't even thought of it, to be honest, but I know there's other better ways, smaller dwellings, ways to use the fans of old, how they used to put them on the roofs where the wind would churn it so that it would suck out the air from the house. Everything has such a tight seal now, but if you use those fans at one point that are at the top of your, I have no idea what these are called, but on top of your roof, in the summertime, your home becomes livable because it's not such a tight envelope, because it sucks that hot air and it's all wind power. So there's ways that we used to do things where we didn't have to continually consume products and not think about the effects of our consumerism, our throwaway society. Can we think more of that time? And again, I'm going to have to agree with Judy on finding a balance. We need to find a balance between everything, because it's not an endless well.
So I just want to say, I think it's sort of easy for us to have that conversation in Vermont. We have a small population. We're pretty like-minded. We, are generally, net zero in terms of our forested land. We're in a political crisis as well. We have a lot of other people who have decision-making power who don't agree with that transition that we're trying to create, who don't want to say the words climate change in government buildings and classrooms and beyond. We are becoming polarized in that sense. And I wonder, beyond a group here that really is already, trying to, it's probably reduce their carbon footprint, how you try to reach people who, aren't already in that, speaking that language or advancing toward the same solutions. It's something that Bill McKibben and I end up talking a lot about, because he's constantly, I think, looking for ways to try and bridge divides and start with common ground. And so I just wonder, where do you try to find common ground with people that don't already feel the same way you do?
That's such a great question. That is such a great question. And I think one that has to do with really listening, and it goes back to, I think I told you a little bit about, doing engagement work and talking to different communities and community members. And I feel if you can zoom out, and I have a quote later on, actually, but if we can zoom out and stop thinking like political talking points, but rather just a real conversation, and zoom out to stop using those talking points like climate change. Instead, talk about real issues, because once you start talking about real issues that matter to people, you start realizing why there's such a divide, right? Because that's where politics takes hold, when you can create that divide because of political talking issues. But once you start seeing, okay, well, for example, let's just take McNeil. So McNeil, the way they can say, oh, okay, well, climate change activists and those drinking the Kool-Aid, and that's what they say, right? Those that are drinking the Kool-Aid in Burlington want to shut down McNeil because it's hurting, this, that, the other thing. But the fact is that you're struggling right now to pay your heating bills. Imagine once McNeil, shuts down. That they're basically, that's what these policies are doing. They're your way of life, and you're not going to be able to feed your family. You're not going to be able to, heat. It's just, that's where the talking points come from. If you can really listen to say, hey, this is going to be really tough, right? How can we find a balance so that not just say close it down, but okay, if we do decide to reduce, say, I'm just saying as an example, McNeil plant, what is the alternative that's going to be a better solution? So it's not going to create more undue burdens on people from whatever communities and whatever political spectrum, but it's not going to create those burdens on them. It's going to be almost a seamless, hopefully balancing act to try to make things better for as many people as possible. So I think that's what's important, real conversations, not so much like talking points, because once you say climate change, you're looked at a certain way. Once you say this, and that's where it stops. It stops before it even begins. And that's not what you want. You want a real conversation. We're all living the same experience when we all kind of want the same thing. When I traveled down to Florida at one point, this was like around the time of COVID, and my kids and I were just by ourselves all the time. So I ended up going to a place in Ocala. The McNeil plant was just an example. But anyway, when we went down to Ocala and, talk about different points of view, I myself do not support Donald Trump whatsoever. It's Trump country. But I started talking to these individuals in this little store who were all masked, etc. And I started just listening to them, knowing that they have such completely opposite views from me, and hearing what they don't want to be told what to do. Well, we've lived on this land for so long. We've cared for this land, but I don't want somebody in politics telling me how to take care of my land and telling me what policies to follow. And I thought, my gosh, so you're basically doing exactly what you're being wanted to do. You just don't want to be told to do so, kind of thing. So it's just starting a conversation and really listening about what people care about on a people level, not on a politics level, not on a talking point level. And that's my suggestion.
Thanks, Kashka.
I'm kind of wiggling in my seat over here. I'm sorry, Kashka, but what you just described, the myth example you just gave, describes bigotry, and it describes white supremacy, and it describes the way colonialism and capitalism has always survived. They create a myth. This is what's going to happen. So the point that you use, that what's going to happen to those if McNeil closes, you know what's going to happen? The people who live around it are going to be able to breathe. They're not going to have health issues. There's going to be fairness and equity to the other ones who live on the south end, who don't have to deal with all these particulate matter that's coming out of the pipe, out of the smokestack, and choking these people. That's what's going to happen. They're going to be able to breathe. There was power there before McNeil. I was here. I lived there. I know there was power before McNeil. There'll be power again.
No, if I may, I think that you're misunderstanding. I think that divisiveness and not listening to each other, that's where the issues come from. I'm not disagreeing with you, Judy. I'm really not. I think that if we don't listen to each other from whatever position somebody comes from, and whether they're coming from a point of bigotry or racism, and they're trying to say this, you're not going to get anywhere by being divisive. Listening to each other and finding common ground, and maybe helping them or educating them where they're, and not where they're wrong, but where things could be better, because you have lived there before McNeil and have heated your home with other things other than, you know, needing things from the McNeil plant. So making sure that you educate them on that, but that has to do with being open to the fact that people might not be coming from the same place. They don't have the same lived experience. They don't understand it.
But
So
that
help
doesn't
them
make it right. That
I'm not
doesn't make
saying-
it right for them to lie and create myths and fill their webpage full of myth number 1, myth number 2. I've read that page, and you talked about, and it lists all these myths that have no truth to them. The science is not there to prove what they're saying. The science is proving otherwise. And we have listened, we have been educated, and now we're trying to speak and our voices are being shuttered.
So
I-
oh, go ahead. Sorry, Kashka, did you want to?
Yeah, I hear it. I don't think that we're communicating very well.
You know, I think, I mean, as I listen, it kind of don't read into this too much, but I was just thinking about what has happened in Washington in the last week, where, we have warriors, we have negotiators, we have harm reducers, and sometimes, in a progressive side of things, or, on the side that we might think that we're on for the purposes of today, we kind of fight each other. And we watched probably 5 people hold the rest of Congress hostage and end up getting a lot of what they want, and I think it forced a lot of us to ask, who are we? Who is that us on the other side? What do we owe to each other in terms of finding common ground and listening? Or are the stakes so high that we should stand firmly where we are and move an entire system towards us, which, as we know, they're going to keep doing that over and over again. They're now creating rules that allow them to keep bringing things to a grinding halt. When we look at the different types of leadership or whatever showmanship that's happening in Washington, who do we want to be in those systems, and what is Vermont's value when we look at systems? Do we gum up the works too? Do we compromise? Do we vote for the compromise candidate? I'm certainly, any of us in politics at least are thinking a lot about, what effectiveness looks like in an increasingly polarized society. So, I don't know if that made sense, but Judy, I don't know if you feel like you identify with somebody in that situation.
Well, I do, of course, but I feel that all this discussion about finding balance this evening is so critical, but it will only work if people tell the truth. And being a truth teller is not easy. We have a representative, I guess, who got there on nothing but lies. And Santos, I think his name is, right? And so we can't be moving forward with nothing but lies and myths. We don't have time for that. This is a critical issue that needs to be addressed yesterday. We don't have time. I mean, we can call in the scientists and learn the facts and make a decision and make a recommendation, but if nobody wants to move it forward to the legislation, what the hell good was it? for, why did we do it? Back to our conversation in the beginning, why did we go to every one of these meetings and not be paid? Because we feel it's our responsibility to do this. We have many other rights, and to be thankful for those rights by showing responsibility, we do things like serve on committees like this. But our voices have to be heard. I'll squeeze my chair in at any table, anytime. And that's what we have to do.
Again, and I'm going to be the devil's advocate with the truth thing, right? Because to me, it really bothers me too. It's really difficult, even talking with my kids, to say, okay, look at a website, or just like I was telling you about McNeil, can you tell us like how to, or can we discuss how to educate others about, you're saying that's a lie, right? But when you have both sides saying, well, these are our scientists saying this, and then the other side has, well, these are our scientists saying this, and truth is, and I hate to get philosophical, but truth can be so subjective in a sense, and what is fact. And it makes you wonder, how do you move forward when both sides feel it's the truth? And I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm just trying to state fact, because those are the facts. We'll say something, and then the other side comes back and says, well, these people are crazy because here are our facts and our science behind it. So how do we find like a way to have that conversation and have a way to have it be meaningful in a way where it makes change happen, right?
Follow the money.
That is a good point.
All the 12 scientists we had come to speak with us, not one of them got paid. Not one person on that committee got paid. If we're not getting paid, why would we lie? Follow the money. It's like I said in the beginning, you cannot put economy before the health of the land. You cannot put anything money related before the health of the land. Now, I do want to bring up something from what you said before. We had a biomass had a meeting at the Intervale Center, and nobody from the community was invited. So I made an effort to go and get some people and bring them to that meeting. And they asked questions of the people of authority on that meeting, in that room. They still haven't gotten answers. And that was 3 months ago. I brought BIPOC people of color from that neighborhood, and they still don't have answers.
Who is supposed to give them answers? I don't think I understood.
Liz Miller from BED on the Climate Council, the lawyer for Burlington Electric. But again, it comes down to following the money. And that's what their questions were related to. And if you can't follow the money to a good place, you got a problem.
Well, again, like for me, I mean, I think that there needs to be a balance. There needs to be a way to find solutions and find common ground. That's kind of where I am, because otherwise things just don't move forward. And I think that the more voices that are at the table and the more voices that we find that have the bandwidth, the capacity, the time to be at the table and to have to be heard, the better it is for us all. And even if those voices happen to disagree with us, because to me, that's the way that we learn. Like, we learn by, I don't know when it became not the right thing to disagree, and or to have different opinions. I love what Obama said, and I can't quote him. There's no way I can quote him, but I think it's important that we have different points of view, and we listen to each other, and we come from different backgrounds. So I think that's the most important thing, to have us come from different backgrounds, come together and have a conversation.
I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm saying is there has to be truth telling.
Always.
So Judy's taught me a lot about sitting in silence also. So I didn't want to over moderate that moment, also because I think we're in a very uncomfortable moment in time right now. And sometimes we just need to sit with that discomfort, and work our way through what is making us uncomfortable, not try and wish it away. I do think just on a logistical note, I think the library had a different time frame than the Zoom, the hour and a half that went out to everybody. So I was encouraged to wrap things up a little bit before 8:30 if I can. And I think there are times that we want to end on a hopeful note or a positive note. I am often asked, what gives you hope? And I say, for me, it's not about what gives me hope, but what gives me courage. Because hope almost feels passive, like I'm going to hand it off to somebody else, the next generation, and they give me hope. And but what gives me the courage to get up every day and do what I do. And so, I just like both of you to talk about, what keeps you going and gives you courage to close. And if people want to add in the chat, what gives them the courage to keep going as well, please do.
My grandchildren keep me going, and I want them to know that they need to live their life like the land was the one that will help them to survive, because the land is the only thing that will help them survive this climate crisis.
What gives me courage? I think I always feel grateful. I feel grateful to be here with all of you. And I think about the people in Ukraine right now. I think about a family that's helping others that no longer have families, that no longer have the ability to have these conversations because they're struggling to survive, literally, because bombs are falling all around them. So courage, I don't have any courage. I have gratitude to be here, to be able to have these conversations, to be able to agree to disagree, to be able to voice our opinions, to be in the presence of people who really know their stuff, who can teach me things, and I learn from them, and hopefully they learn from me. So for me, that's gratitude. And I will continue with that. And I think truth telling is, I think it's lacking in this country, but also being able to say what you feel. That's and not be hurt for that. I remember that wasn't the case where I came from. You couldn't say things out loud. So that's a huge thing in this country. It's wonderful. And I love that. I love that. So I have gratitude, and that's what gives me courage. My children, always.
Gratitude, grandchildren. I think those are great notes to start to wrap up. I see people putting their thoughts in the chat, which is appreciated. And I want to thank again the League of Women Voters. You know, just this is a large group of people for a Wednesday late at night to be talking about climate justice and who ends up being left behind. So it was wonderful to be with all of you. It was wonderful to have such an engaged audience. And I see Michelle coming back on the screen. I didn't know if there was anything, Michelle, you wanted to add about the series before we wrap up, but I really appreciate you including me in this. And I always appreciate the opportunity to talk to Judy and Kashka. It's really great to get to know you. And I really appreciate all of the unpaid labor that you have put into a better climate proposal and a more robust opportunity for people to engage.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kesha. Thank you all.
Thank you for a great panel.
Thank you.